If you're a therapist or an educator and you feel like you don't have enough time and resources to make the impact that you want on your students and clients, just give me a couple minutes of your time and I will show you how you can solve that problem. I'm Karen Dudek-Brannan, and I help educators and therapists become better leaders so that they can make a bigger impact on the students and clients that they serve. And today I wanted to talk about a concept, the concept of assets and leverage. Now, usually when we talk about assets, we're talking about it in the context of personal finance and different financial investments, but you can actually use this concept in the therapy and education world to make a bigger impact on your students. So, if you work in education and healthcare, you probably know that most people who work in those settings have limited time and resources, and there are a lot of systemic issues to deal with that makes it hard to show up and provide the intervention and the specialized services that kids need in order for them to make progress. And so I am definitely not suggesting that there aren't real challenges, but when you're in a situation where that is the case, it's really important for you to be mindful of how you use your time. And so that's why I wanted to introduce this concept of leverage. So obviously when we're leveraging something, we're trying to create some kind of point to create maximum impact. So as a therapist, for example, you might have a certain number of time with your students that you're working with. And for example, I was a speech pathologist in the schools for 14 years, and I had with some of my students maybe 30-40 minutes a week, and there was only so much I could cover with them within that time frame. And while I knew that I was capable and qualified of working on more, there was only so much that I could do within that length of time that I had with my students. So that's why I had to start getting really creative about how I could make sure that those students got what they need, even if I wasn't always the one directly providing that intervention and that support. I might have been qualified to do certain things and work on certain skills, but I knew that I couldn't follow my students around throughout the entire course of their day and provide that support. So I had to figure out how to be more creative with how I made that happen for my students. And that's when I started thinking about this within the context of creating assets. So assets obviously are things that you have that can make an impact on your results. When we're thinking about finance, usually it's like we invest in something or we purchase something, and then it gives us some kind of a return on our investment. Well, when we invest time and resources and energy in assets in the context of being a therapist, what we're doing is that we want to get some kind of return, which is more time and of course better results for our clients. So that's what's going to be the return on your investment as a therapist. So I wanted to talk about some specific assets that you can build so that you can leverage the time that you have and then see a bigger impact on your clients. So the first place that I usually start with clinicians that I am mentoring, and one place where a lot of people start, is that you want to figure out your clinical skills and your teaching skills and figure out what you're actually doing when you have a student in front of you or a group of students or whole class in front of you. So obviously building your skills to teach students or to conduct a therapy session is a good place to start. So building those clinical skills, those skills are assets. And so the way that we think about this leverage is that you might take a course or invest in learning something. Now you have that knowledge. You've spent that time, you've invested that time up front to build those skills. And now you don't have to necessarily take the whole course again. You might just need to sharpen and tune up a little bit, but you have those skills. So that means that you can plan for sessions a lot more quickly because you've invested that time up front. So those skills are an asset. So that's something that's going to give you a return on that investment. So skills are one asset that you can build, that you can leverage for the future because it helps you to be more efficient over time. Now, obviously, if you are in a situation where you're providing specialized services for students, you know that direct therapy time as I've been saying, can only get you so far. You know that you only have so much time with your students. So even if you develop your clinical skills up to a certain point, you're going to need to leverage some other things in order to make an impact on your students across the board. And so here's where some other assets come in. So we can think of this in terms of resources and trainings and then relationships. So I'm going to talk about the resources and trainings first. So one example of how this played out for me was that I knew that I was facilitating language skills. I was giving my students vocabulary skills and strategies that I wanted them to apply across the board. But I knew that if I didn't create some kind of tools for students that they could use once they left my room, that they weren't necessarily going to apply things across settings. And it would sometimes be hard for me to get into classrooms, even though I would try to do that as much as I possibly could. But I couldn't always physically be there supporting my students in their classrooms. So what I had to do was put together some tutorials and resources that I could give people. So parents, teachers, other therapists that I was working with, students, so tools that the students could actually use. So I would actually create physical things that I could use in my sessions and that I could also give students. So those resources in themselves, again, they were things that I had to invest in upfront. But the purpose was that as I created those resources, I didn't have to keep going back and doing it again. And most importantly, I was saving myself time because I wasn't having to always be the one to facilitate those things. We want to give our students these skills and these tools that they can use so we don't always have to be the ones prompting them. Now, I was doing that for my students, but the other thing is that you want to think about this in terms of sharing your clinical knowledge. So you can also use these resources that you create to help support the other people that are supporting that student. So one example of how it would play out for me is that I could create something that a teacher might be able to use within their classroom to help a student, for example. And again, once I've created those things, I've taken the time to do a training or a consult with a teacher. I don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. That is an asset that I have that I can leverage. And once I've trained a bunch of people, now those teachers have knowledge and skills that they can use to extend what I'm doing in my therapy sessions. So I don't always have to go back and do those trainings again because the other people that I work with are starting to be aware of what I do and what they should be doing to support their students as well. So that's an additional way that you can leverage without me having to go around and do it myself. The other thing that I wanted to mention and really wrap up with, obviously, those are just 3 examples. We've talked about your own skills and your knowledge, and then resources and trainings to help other people that you're working with, like your students and your colleagues, build their own skills as well. And then finally, obviously, the relationships. So this really ties into both of those other things that I've mentioned. So if you are somebody who is working on a team and you're having to coordinate multiple services, you can only do so much on your own. You can't function in a silo. And in order for you to be able to know what you need to do for your students when they're physically in front of you, in order for you to know what trainings and resources are needed to support other people so that they can actually implement them, we need to think about things from a bird's eye view and not just focus on what we're doing when we have that student in front of us. So that's why it's really important to build relationships. So those relationships that you have with people are a key asset because that's what's going to help you make things happen. It's what's going to help people be open to trainings and resources that you might recommend. It's what's going to help you to have influence over how things are done in your facility because, again, people might not always be aware of what is best for students within the context of what you're doing. So if you can have influence on how things are done, that's going to make an impact as well. So those relationships are going to be key in helping you to get support across the board and help students get support across the board and help people to buy into what you're recommending. A lot of times therapists they'll be really clear on what the student needs, but they're not quite sure how to make it happen. And they're not quite sure how to, again, have that influence on how things are done. Because when you think about things in that broader lens, That's what's going to help you to actually make things happen and make some bigger changes at your facility, in your community, and in your field as a whole. So again, we want to think about our role, not just in the context of what am I doing when students are in front of me. We also want to think about what assets can I build to support my caseload and to support my students, and how do I leverage them so that I can make a bigger impact, so that the things that I'm actually doing when I have students or clients in front of me can amplify and can make a bigger impact on how they're functioning across the board. So I talk more about this concept of assets and leverage, as well as some other key skills that are going to be essential for you as you show up as a leader in your position, regardless of whether you're in a designated leadership role or not. I talk about this in my clinical leadership manifesto. What this is basically just a written document of some different viewpoints and ways that you can shift your thinking to start thinking like a leader so that you can make a bigger impact on the students that you serve. So I'm actually going to share a link to the Clinical Leadership Manifesto so you can sign up for it and learn more about assets and leverage, as well as other ways that you can show up as a leader and make a bigger impact on your students. I'll share that in the description of this video so that you can check it out and you can learn how you can be a leader and really show up in a way that helps you to make a bigger impact